Are you ready to boss up and start that business? You're listening to Be a Boss Coaching Podcast. My name is Beatriz Rivera, and this show is my empowerment tool and community builder. My mission is to help queer and WOC, that's queer and women of color, start their businesses with accountability, clarity, and most of all, confidence. On this podcast, I go over the question, can entrepreneurship help us reach our potential? I talk about my hardships, my wins, and you'll even hear how other queer and women of color have navigated and come to own their entrepreneur identity. I'm a social worker turned entrepreneur coach, and as such, of course, I'm going to give you tips, inspiration, and maybe even some laughs to help you not just start, but transform into that boss. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Be a Boss Coaching Podcast. This is episode 13. I hope that you had an awesome weekend and starting your week right. I'm excited to share with you today's interview that I have with Karina Mora, who's the founder and creator of Elevating La Cultura, and you're going to hear more about her. She has so many roles. She has so many roles, and her story is very unique, one that we can all learn from. She's a photographer, a podcast host, a mentor, a homeschool mom, an Airbnb Superhost, and also a trip facilitator. So I am excited for you to hear just how she does it, how she navigates her journey, and for you to learn from our discussion. Before I jump in though, I want to just share a quick excerpt that I read from this essay called The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action by Audre Lorde. And the reason why I want to share this with you is because when I read this, it really brought out the urgency as to why we should all be sharing our stories, why we should all be sharing our journeys and speaking our truths. And it really opened my eyes, and it just validated for me this idea of me starting this podcast. It's just an excerpt, but I will include in the show notes a link to the full essay, and I strongly encourage you and recommend that you go read the full essay because it is so empowering and just very encouraging if you're someone that has ever felt like you're scared or fear of sharing your story, of speaking words, speaking your truth. So here it goes. In becoming forcibly and essentially aware of my mortality and of what I wished and wanted for my life, however short it might be, priorities and omissions became strongly etched in a merciless light, and what I most regretted were my silences. Of what had I ever been afraid? To question or to speak as I believed could have meant pain or death. But we all hurt in so many different ways all the time, and pain will either change or end. Death, on the other hand, is the final silence. And that might be coming quickly now without regard for whether I had ever spoken what I needed to be said or had only betrayed myself into small silences while I planned someday to speak or waited for someone else's words. And I begin to recognize a source of power within myself that comes from the knowledge that while it is most desirable not to be afraid, learning to put fear into a perspective gave me great strength. That is such a powerful excerpt. It's just one paragraph of this essay, but like I said, encourage you to go read the full essay. I would like to remind you to please share this podcast, to please share the episode with your friends and your family. That's how podcasts grow. So I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for making it spread and making it bigger. So please remember to come on over to beabosscoaching.com. You're going to learn more about me. You can learn more about this podcast. You can listen to all of the other podcast episodes and look at the other episodes with other guests. I also have solo episodes. You can read my blog and you can learn more about coaching. I invite you to book a call with me if you're someone that is starting their entrepreneur journey, their business journey, who want to walk along their journey like a boss, who want to feel that confidence and really walk along their journey, make decisions, create a mindset that allows them to reach their business goals and to bring their ideas to life. You can also come on over to Instagram or TikTok at Be a Boss Coaching, where you'll see me hang out for the most part. And I'm actually starting to hang out a little bit on LinkedIn as well. So come on over to LinkedIn if you're on there, and please share with your contacts, with your friends. All right, but enough. I really want to dive into this interview. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the show. So today with me, I have Karina Mora, who is the owner and founder of Elevating La Cultura. But I will let her introduce herself and talk about her business.
Yeah, I'm a professional photographer, speaker, podcaster, focused on helping people reclaim their cultural legacy by elevating my native Mexican culture through photography, workshops, and facilitated trips to Mexico. So my podcast, Elevating La Cultura, features stories from first and second generation Latinas who are working hard, pursuing their passions, and pouring their positive efforts into the next generation. I'm also an Airbnb Superhost. I'm a homeschool mom, and I'm currently working on building a multimedia studio space here in Chicago.
Oh my God. So amazing. But thank you so much for being here. So, one thing that I know, you started your business 13 years ago, which is, I think you're one of the entrepreneurs, business owners that I've interviewed who's had the longest business. So, congratulations. That is a big feat. And if you can, reflect on your time and journey 13 years ago and think about what inspired you at that time to be a business owner.
Man, 13 years seems like such a long time, but I still feel young and like I am just starting in my business, and I think that's because I've had so many pivots and have really developed and shifted what my offerings are. So, yes, it does seem like a long time when you say 13 years, but to me, it doesn't seem that long. Maybe I'm just like living in this delusion as a millennial that I'm still young and cool. But um, I think I had the privilege of my father being an entrepreneur. And so, even though going to a university was super important to my family,
Mm,
and the goal was to have a 9 to 5 job, a good job. I think I always had it in me to design the life that I wanted
mm,
through entrepreneurship because I had that example through my father.
mm,
He had many businesses and he still cannot let it go. He still does a little bit of everything now, even though he is not living in Chicago anymore and still comes back to
mm,
do business. But when I was just graduated from college, I was working with him. And so I was learning about accounting, I was learning about managing a team, I was learning all of these business things. And so I think it was only a matter of time before I was like, okay, let me try this. And when I graduated from college, it was maybe a year after, I think it was, that I got married. And my husband is a photographer. So when before we got married, I had already started like accompanying him on some photo shoots and dabbling in photography. And so when we got married and decided to settle down in Chicago, I was like, let's do this. I don't know how to build a wedding photography business, but I'm going to learn and I'm just going to do it one step at a time.
I'm actually so jealous that you were like, I started working with my dad, and then that sort of became the path because I actually didn't. I also come from a father who was a business owner and he had his business. He has been in business for pretty much my entire life. And I never grew up thinking that he was an entrepreneur and thinking that he was a business owner. I grew up thinking that he worked and provided for our family. And it was same thing. I had the expectation of going to college, right? The same thing, the same message my parents gave to me was do well in school, go to college, get a good job. And that was the experience for me. So I'm like, you got to work with your dad. That's awesome. I was looking at your website and I really love this line that you have on there that says we're literally holding on to our ancestral roots while decolonizing our lives. And I'm curious when you began that mindset or that political education, and how did that, was that something that you thought about when you first started your wedding photography business, or was it something that came later as you started to be in business and look more into your ancestral roots?
It definitely wasn't something that I was thinking of when I started my business. I grew up in predominantly white areas. So when I was growing up, going to middle school, high school, we were living in a predominantly white suburb at the time, a suburb of Chicago. And then when I went to college, I went to a predominantly white college. And so I guess I had grown up in this way of thinking that like I knew that my family did things differently. Like we would go to Mexico every year, sometimes twice a year, to visit the family for the summers. My cousins would come, my tias would come, my abuelo would come and stay for the summer. And I knew we ate different things, but for some reason, like I grew up in the time frame where it was like very much color blindness. And
Mm,
in the area that I grew up in, everyone was like, oh, well, you're like just one of us. And
mm,
um, I was hanging out with predominantly white people. And it wasn't until I started experiencing some microaggressions that I can recall now. And during that time, I didn't know how to really process those in my mind. And so I would just like, I mention it to my parents and they'd be like, oh, yeah, don't, that's just how some people are. Like, don't worry about it. Just forget about it. That's ignorant. Okay, let's just move on. And so I navigated these spaces by just keeping my head down and ignoring microaggressions, macroaggressions, just kind of swallowing it. And it wasn't until I started having kids. So I have two kids, and I had already started building my wedding photography business, and the people that I was looking up to in the wedding industry were predominantly white.
mhm,
And I was like soaking everything that they set up. And I was like, okay, I got to pretend to be like the clients that I want to attract. Okay, I want to attract higher paying clients. So I have to pretend to be in these circles. But
mhm,
even though I thought that I was doing a good job, like there was this like aha moment where I realized that I had created like this dual identity within myself, and what I was trying to teach my kids and raise them to be proud of their heritage, their culture, their learning Spanish. I was trying to act and be a completely different person when I was building my business. So, like, I didn't talk about my kids at all. I didn't talk about like me going on vacation to Mexico, or I didn't like, I was just completely two different people when I was trying to build my name in the wedding industry. And it also was like it helped because I was building this wedding photography business with my husband, and he is white. And so it was very easy for me to kind of slip into this American mindset and pretend to be like in these circles, when I realized that when I was trying. Like, I remember this one embarrassing story where I was meeting with this client and like it was like a dream client at the time. I was shooting or photographing their wedding in this really like exclusive club in Chicago. And I said something, a word wrong, and she corrected me. And I was like, I realized that I have never known that that is the correct way to say it, and I just felt so small, and it was like those instances piling up on each other as I was trying to get into this ideal client avatar,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized that my lived experiences were not the same and that I was like way in over my head. I'm just like, what is this world? Like, this is the world that I had been taught to attain, like higher paying clients, like the elite. And I just found myself, what am I doing? As it was around the time of the political climate change here in 2016. Um, like,
2015. Yeah, those are big years. Yeah.
yeah.
For
And
like
so,
a lot of Black Lives Matter
yeah.
movements. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so it was like I was trying to attain this level of clientele, but then I was realizing that that level of clientele might not necessarily be safe for me,
Mm.
even though I had made myself think that I was like one of them. Like it really was some mind games that I had realized that I had been playing. And it was like a whole identity crisis because I was like, what am I doing? And what am I teaching my kids? Like, do I want them to go through all of the same mental hoops that I am going through right now and deconstructing who I am? And so that's what I mean. Like, I wanted to hold on to my cultural roots, um, but then realizing that if I continued in the path that I was on, that there was a lot that I didn't realize and had to kind of decolonize and shed all of these ideas. I just wrote an article recently about this idea of fake it till you make it, which is a very big like idea, it was 10 years ago in the entrepreneurial world when you were trying to attain these clients and you were told to fake it until you made it. And like deconstructing that now can be really traumatic because you're realizing that these ideas are built or were built with this idea of capitalism and colonialism. And like once you start going really deep into the history of like certain quotes or sayings, like that's when the reality can kick in and you realize that, oh man, the things that I was taught in school or like this American dream is really not what I want. Like this is an illusion that we were that we were taught.
Mm-hmm. It's a myth. And I'm
Mhm.
so glad that, first of all, that's deep. There's a lot that was happening during that time, just as you started mentioning you becoming a mom and trying to have them become intimate and linked more to their cultural roots. And I mean, there's a lot of thoughts that I have. One thing is this whole fake it till you make it. That has never resonated with me either. So that's number one. I think the other thing that you said too around trying to create a view for other people around who you are and like your business. And I think that is something that happens not just in business, but when you go to school. If you go to a predominantly white school and you realize, why do I not feel like I belong? Or why do I not feel like I am supposed to be here? And it's because you're trying to fit to what the culture of the place is. And in your situation, the culture of wedding photography, like you said, is mostly white. I imagine white women. And how do you bring who you are and like what you want to, even as to like how you want to take pictures or like how you want to present yourself? There's so much expression around photography, and then there's an expectation around molding yourself to what photography, for especially wedding photography, should look like. So there's a lot there. Thank you for sharing that. That validated a lot for me. Can you talk more about your pivot? So, when you started to think about how you show up, right? Like the ways that you show up and bringing yourself into your work, is that around the time that you felt like, okay, maybe this is where I need to pivot? Because you've had a few pivots in your business. Would you say that that's like around times that you've acted on that thought?
Yes. I started to pivot around the 2015, 2016,
Mm-hmm.
2017 timeframe.
Yeah.
And with all of my pivots, I can't just leave everything that I've done
Right.
because I still have clients, I still have contracts. And so whenever I do pivot, I want to be careful because whenever I'm changing the way that I'm showing up in business or on social media, I always make sure that I do have income coming in. So just because I say that I pivoted from wedding photography, I started pivoting officially, I think 2017, where I stopped marketing. But it wasn't until 2022 that I officially photographed my last wedding under our name. So it is a slow thing, but I officially started pivoting in 2017. And that just meant that I was not marketing anymore. I was not putting out that I wanted to bring in more weddings. I stopped posting on social media. I was still doing the same things and providing the same kind of uh, experience for the clients that I did have. And I still did work with some of my friends in the wedding industry to keep cash flow. And so I do want to not give an illusion that I just went from one thing and had instant success in another thing and that all the cash just kind of like magically was there. It does take a long time and does take a lot of intention when deciding to pivot, or even just like pivoting from a 9 to 5 to full-time entrepreneurship takes a lot
Mhm.
of intention and thoughtfulness. So when I did start to pivot, I did I was kind of like discovering myself and just bringing people along on that journey. And it was through that when I would go to Mexico and I was trying to just reclaim my culture in a way that I hadn't before. I mean, I had relationships with my primos, my tias, my family in Mexico, but I didn't know how to cook. I didn't know like the history of my own culture. And so
Yeah.
I would go to Mexico and I would learn, I would take workshops, I would go by myself. I would um, then put what I was learning on social media and just share in my Instagram, in my
Yeah.
stories. This was before Reels.
Yeah.
So this was um, when Instagram was kind of new,
Mm.
and I was doing blog posts, and the feedback that I was getting was like overwhelming. I was resonating with people that I did not realize wanted to know about this journey or wanted to know about me personally. And so during that transition, I started offering fine art photography, that I would go to Mexican cities, well, cities in Mexico, and take pictures. And then I would talk about the history of that photograph, or like
Oh.
why it resonated to me, or like why this image was important for me to capture and what it meant to me, my history, what it meant. Like if I was taking a picture of a plant, like I would go and I would research that plant and then share that on social media, on my blog. I was cooking. I was bringing my kids into it, like sharing the Mexican meals with them that I remember from my childhood. So
Yeah.
it really was maybe like I don't know. I was doing this for maybe 3 years
Mm-hmm.
intentionally and like slowly transitioning the content that I was putting out there. And it was right before the pandemic that I was going to plan to offer my first facilitated trip. Because as I was doing this and I was receiving the feedback, I'm like, it'd be great if people could come with me and experience this with me. Like, I am having so much fun. I was bringing my father along, I was bringing my sister, my cousin. Like, we were going to Mexico and having the best time, like just talking. And I was like, I want to do this for other people that are commenting on my Instagram. Like, let me plan for that. And then 2020 happened. And so that's when there was another pivot. But I think like we were all collectively pivoting during that time. So yeah, I've had two major pivots. One was more of me having this identity crisis and then just taking people along with me on the journey. And then the other one was like, what am I doing? I need to be able to still bring in cash flow while in a pandemic type of pivot.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about that time? I think that during that time, there's a lot of concern that a lot of businesses were having, right? Around the pandemic, there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of shifting and pivoting, even for businesses that were trying to figure out how to keep their doors open. And can you share a little bit about what your strategy or what your like, I don't know if strategy is the right word, but what how you managed to deal with the pandemic and continue on this path of what you wanted to do with your photography business?
I think that first year in 2020, I didn't know what to do.
Mhm.
The events industry was completely turned upside down. And
Yeah.
it was during that time that I really took time to rest and spend time with my family.
Mhm.
And I did have the privilege of my husband having a 9 to 5. So we
Mhm.
were still having uh, income. And
Mhm.
so usually we tried to live off of his income. And then the business income was either invested back into our business or diversified into another option. So it wasn't like we really needed business income to pay for our day to day bills. So I do want to say that we did have that privilege because I know that some entrepreneurs like just had their small business and had to look for resources through banks or through the government to be able to stay afloat. So during that time, I did take time to not really offer any large I wasn't like pushing my business to keep income coming. I was trying to see how I could support other small businesses during that time. And when I took time to kind of sit back, rest, uh, and listen, I started connecting with more businesses across the country.
Mhm.
And that is really where Elevating La Cultura podcast
Mhm.
started. I was
Mhm.
able to share the stories and the voices of first and second gen Latinas across the country. And so I think whenever I do pivot, if it's going to be a successful pivot, you really need to listen to what your audience, your following, your clients are asking for. And
Mhm.
so during the time of 2020, 2021, we were really tapping into community and really tapping into how we can support each other, especially like the non-majority businesses. We're trying to support like the Latina businesses were trying to support each other. Black owned businesses were trying to support each other. And we were all trying to support each other as well
Mhm.
by elevating our platforms. And so
Yeah.
I think I was able to really listen and see what was needed at that time. And so, yeah, whenever you are thinking about a pivot, it's less about what you want to put out there. Like you could have a great idea, but if you're not listening to what others want and listening to how you can support them, then you're going to face a little bit more resistance. And so I think also learning how to tap into each other's stories and find connection is also really pivotal in
Yeah.
having a successful pivot, because whenever you decide to say like, okay, I'm going to move from a service-based business to a product-based business, or I want to include this product, you really have to understand your reason why and the story behind that so that you can connect with other people and they can connect with you and what you're offering.
Oh my God, so good. So, so good. Thank you for sharing that because I think that there's a lot, and I'm gonna be fully transparent with you right now. And I think I mentioned this, when we first connected, is that I've been having fleeting thoughts of pivoting. And honestly, it stopped there because I don't know what that would look like. I was just like, and I think it comes from this like desperation maybe, or like
Mm-hmm.
maybe you need, or like things are not working out, or things are like maybe you want things to move faster. And sometimes we have those thoughts like, oh, well, maybe I should have a course, or maybe I should build a product, and maybe I should write a book. And pivoting, I think when it comes to that word, I usually think of it as like literally changing directions in something different. But I love that you said that you weren't 100% just stop doing what you were doing, right? Like you slowly, progressively decided to pivot and to share what felt more true to you slowly. And I really like that because I think that there's that, I guess, thought sometimes that pivoting means that you're just gonna switch lanes, and it doesn't really need to look that way. Like it can look like you're maybe, slowly,
Yeah. I'll
progressively.
It's more like layering. And so
Mm.
I'll share a little example. So
Mhm.
when I started pivoting and offering fine art photography, I was framing and printing large format photos that people could
Mhm.
have in their homes. And I was
Mhm.
like, okay, I need it to be like this specific look, and I am only going to offer these things, and that's it. And
Mhm.
as I was listening, people were like, "Oh, do you have any smaller sizes?" And I'd be like, "No, just these 3 sizes, just this one frame." And
Yeah.
then 2020 happened, and I was like, "Okay, people are wanting something a little bit more not as high end or not as much of a luxury purchase, but
Mhm.
more they just want to support a business. They want to have some photos of Mexico. So, okay, let me see, let me listen and open myself up and offer smaller photos,
Mm.
smaller prints. And then people would ask me, especially like during 2020 when we were in our homes for an extended period of time, they're
Mhm.
like, "Are you gonna offer any more products, maybe puzzles?" And I'm just like, "Puzzles? I wasn't even thinking about puzzles." Like, "Oh, I don't want it." And then I launched puzzles
Mm.
and then they sold out. And I'm like,
Oh,
"Oh, okay,
so
all
you
right,
did the
let me layer,
puzzles.
let me layer." Yes. And so that is what I mean by you might have this idea of what you want to create, and it might be great. But at the same time, you have to also be listening to what other people might want and might
Mhm.
be asking for, and just have an open mind and say, okay, let me research. I want to create this experience for when people interact with my products. So, how can I make that happen with the products that they're requesting or asking for? And then also, like, I didn't stop offering my initial products, I just kind of like layered it on top. And
Mm.
I'm still offering products, but I've also layered other pieces where people could interact with me with like through the facilitated trips. I still offer photography to my existing clients, but
Mm.
it's just in addition to the other things that I want to also offer. So, yes, that's what I mean by pivoting is just maybe exploring a different option and
Mm.
seeing if it's a right fit, and then knowing when to let go of that one thing that you are pivoting from. So,
Mm.
like, even though I started pivoting away from weddings, like, I didn't finally let it go until I think it was 2021 that took my last contract. And then New Year's Eve of last year was when I finally completed that. And so that's when I fully let it go.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. I really like that. I resonate with that because I just had a conversation with a really good friend of mine. And, when you catch up with friends, you let them know how you're doing and, how things are going. And of course, we talked about my business and I let them know, I wish things were a little bit further along. I was at this stage of my business and I let them know maybe I'm having a hard time figuring out should I pivot? If I do, when does that happen? It resonates with the same advice that he gave me because it's like, no, it doesn't mean that you're just completely letting go of what you're doing now. You can explore other things, you can explore other options and see if they work and then add that to like your current work and maybe that is what you truly enjoy and then figure out a way to slowly progress to that a little bit more. But right now you're doing your podcast and you're having a great time. And honestly, I'm having a great time. I think I mentioned this podcast is catching up to me because there's a lot of work in it, but I'm loving the work. It's really, really good. Obviously, I'm still offering my coaching. I still offer that service to folks. So I'm thank you for laying out what pivoting can and cannot look like.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes you pivot and there's crickets when you
Yeah.
launch something, but that doesn't mean that people don't want what you offer. It just might mean that you need to shift the way you're marketing, or maybe it's the time that you're marketing is not resonating with people, whether it's summer, spring, or fall. Like, it's just a learning and seeing what you can sustain and what you can
Yeah.
support and what you want to do.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, you talked about some steps that helped you pivot, and I love the name of your platform, Elevating La Cultura. How would you say folks can elevate their cultura, or like how you mentioned, like maybe even become more attuned to who they are in their business? You talked a little bit about it earlier, but is there any specific practices or like maybe even like mantras that you have that keep you grounded to who you are, your cultura, and as you're doing business, as you're like continuing to grow and be operating your business?
It's a good question. And um, it really, when I read this question, it got me like thinking back to when I was starting my business.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I feel like I was networking and building my business a little differently than
Mm-hmm.
was the norm, but it really got me a lot of connections, and it brought me success. And I think it's because I tapped into the things that were important to me, and I realized that those things were part of my cultura. So, for example, when I would go to networking events, it was really important for me, even though I'm an introvert and was like, "Oh, I don't wanna go. I don't wanna go talk about myself." I
Yeah.
would try to make connections because, like, in the Latino culture, like, we're always, like, connecting people, and we're like, "Oh, well, I know Doña Maria just started her offering tamales, and you should support her," and we're always looking for, at least in Chicago, we're, like, looking for taqueros and
Mm-hmm.
people that can help us when we're throwing an event, and we're always, like, saying, "Okay, who do you recommend?" We're trying to make those connections. It's built on relationships. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I was networking, I would meet someone, and then I would take them out to coffee or set up a meeting and say, like, tell me about yourself. How can I help you? Like, how
Mm.
can we elevate each other and build our business together? And so I really started doing a lot of collaborations and really just highlighting that part of who I was and thinking back on it. I'm like, that was my cultura. That's what I saw growing up. And
Mhm.
even when I host events and host workshops now, I'm always like, okay, there's got to be food. There's
Mhm.
got to be like good drinks, good food. I want everyone to feel included. I want everyone to feel special. And that's what I felt when I would go to Mexico and see my family. Like we would get together for a huge reunion and we'd have food, we'd have music. Like I realized that I was wanting to bring those things into my business, even though it wasn't the norm in the spaces that I was
Mm.
occupying.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really helped me stand out because they would be like, okay, Karina is like the go to person if you want to know who to connect with. And this was early on in my business building that I
Mm.
was doing that without even realizing that was part of my culture. And so now I can talk about it and say, what is part of your culture that
Mm.
you can bring into your business so that you can make people feel
Mm.
connected
Yeah.
and
To
like
you.
yes, that you can also like when you share that part of yourself and share your story and share the values that you have, like you attract the clients that align with those things. And
Yeah.
so it makes things a little easier when you're willing to be open. Now that's something that I've had to work through because
Mm.
we're also not very open. We're like,
Mm. Mhm.
who's going to take advantage of me? Who's going to
Mm.
do this? And
Mhm.
like we're also, as women, told not to share too much or be too loud. So it is a lot of deconstructing, going back to deconstructing mindsets and decolonizing the things that we were told because it's
Mhm.
not serving us anymore. And we're realizing that we can really lean into our cultura and elevate that while building a business, and it will actually bring us success and help us attract the people that we want to be our clients and we want to serve and we want to work alongside.
Yeah, that's so good. It brought me back to thinking about when I went to grad school at Columbia, which is like Columbia University in New York, because being in a brand new school in a brand new city was like two like major bombs of like identity crisis. Like that's when I experienced my identity crisis is what am I doing in this white school and trying to like get my master's degree in New York City is fast paced and like I never taken the train, so it was a lot. But that plays a part of my trajectory of the way that I think. But then I started thinking, how do I bring who I am and my experiences into my business? Because that was really important to me. Like what I learned in grad school was really important to me. And I was having a hard time figuring out what does it look like for me to be a business owner, but also be aware of the different ways in which sometimes capitalistic systems perpetuate oppression, especially for Black and Brown business owners. But something that really resonates with me that I think it's part of, maybe it's not my culture, but it's still part of who I am and my identity, is my healing experience. The work that I've done in that, and just like the whole culture around mental health and therapy and like healing in general, that is like a big part of who I am. But that is also part of like how I want to influence my culture, because there's a lot of stigma right within the Latinx community and Latin community around mental health. And I talk a lot to my family. You guys need to go to therapy. Like all of you need therapy, like I'm doing the work. I'm breaking generational curses, and I'm probably, and actually I just saw a meme on TikTok where there's this cat driving. I don't know if you're on TikTok, but there's like a cat driving, and it has this meme where I'm realizing I'm breaking generational curses by not bringing in more generations. And I thought it was so funny. And I was like, oh my God, I sent it to my sister But I'm like, that is part of my culture. And I think that those two, like when you say coming back to your roots and your cultura, to me, it can go hand in hand with coming back to who you are and what makes you you, your identity. I'm starting to realize that my healing journey, that is what attracts people. Talking about that, it's not easy. It's not easy, but that is what attracts people. It when it comes to just like who you are, there's just so many different ways that how you can identify, either through your cultura, through your experiences and everything that like makes you you. Anyway, thank you for sharing. Okay, so we have a few minutes. I wanted to go into this question because you mentioned you're a lot of different roles. You're a photographer, you are a podcast host, you're a mentor, you're a homeschool mom, you're an Airbnb Superhost, and from what I've heard, for people who have Airbnbs, that is a lot of work. I imagine. And now you have a business around facilitating trips, or that's part of the work that you do. And you are working on having a multimedia studio space. How do you do it? What is your secret? Like, what is going on?
I don't know. Like, honestly, I was thinking after reading your questions, I was like, oh, that's a lot. And,
Right.
you know, I do it with the support of my partner. My husband and I have really talked about our values and what's important. And we support each other because he also has like his own small business or side business along with his 9 to 5. And so our schedules have to be tight. And I think two things came to mind. The year ebbs and flows. And so even though I facilitate trips, I'm not doing it like every month. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do it a few times a year. I offer a few trips a year. And so I have a system for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the podcast schedule, I release 2 seasons a year. When I first started, it was 3 seasons a year, but I cut back to 2 seasons a year. And I have a system for that.
Mm.
And with the Airbnb, we opened it up in October of last year, and I have a system for that. And so I automate as much as I can. So I have automated messages for Airbnb. I still have like times where I have to manually answer or communicate, and that's fine. I have a system for cleaning, and I even can bring my kids into the cleaning process because I have a system and I'm just like,
Yeah.
okay, you do this, you do this, you do this. Okay, check it off. So I think having systems in place are great when trying to add something else on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and another thing that I have implemented this past year is outsourcing. And while I'm building all of these parts of my business, I choose what I am going to keep on my plate and what I can outsource. And so, even though I've been the sole person to be homeschooling my kids and be that person who is with them day to day, I think this year is when I've reached my limit. And so I have outsourced that. And so they're still at home, but I have an online where I've hired online coaches and tutors that are going
Mm-hmm.
to be taking over that part of my life. And so when I first started my business, that was the one thing I didn't want to outsource. I wanted to be the one homeschooling my kids and having the control over our schedules as a whole. And I was outsourcing things in my business. And so now things have changed where I am more in the business and can outsource the education part of my kids' schedules. So it's a lot of just taking inventory every 6 months, every year to see what is working, what is not working, where I can tighten up my systems to work a little smoother. and just knowing my limits. I also need to build in time to pour into myself and scheduling time for therapy and scheduling time where I'm not doing anything and just having family days. I got my weekends back now that I'm not a
Yeah.
wedding photographer. So I've been enjoying my weekends.
I mean, you went
Um,
to the movies this morning. So
yes.
I was like, how do you have time to go to the movies with
Yeah.
everything you got going on? But hey, kudos to you.
Well, my brain is always working,
Yeah.
but this is the last week before my kids start school
Mm.
next week. And so
Mhm.
I have carved out time during the day to be able to spend time with them doing like the last bit of summer things. And
Mm.
so that just means that I have to work later in the day, and that's okay.
Wow. I wish I could like take your brain and just put it on mine so that I could feel what it feels like to have everything work and you be the one to know that you did it all. Like I want to I need that brain.
Girl, it's wild. Wild up here.
Hey, I want it. I want the one.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Kudos. That's amazing. Systems. You heard it here, guys. Systems are
Yeah.
important. Automation is important. Outsourcing is important. So there's three things you could do there to be awesome like Karina. Okay.
Thank you.
Last question. What would you say to new entrepreneurs who are just learning about themselves and how to embrace their entrepreneur identity?
I think entrepreneurship is like a new way of thinking. If you've grown up thinking that you have this like trajectory and you have to do A, B, C, D in order to get to Z, and that might include like your education, that might include getting your bachelor's, getting your master's, like going and doing all the things that look good on paper. And entrepreneurship is not always that nice and neat. And being able to be okay with that and not thinking that you're failing is going to be huge, because there is no real blueprint for entrepreneurship.
Mm,
Yes, there are things that you need to have in place, but entrepreneurship, when you're starting your small business, you are designing it the way that you want your life to be. And
mhm,
so that can be different, that can look different to everyone. When I was starting my business, I was also wanting to be homeschooling. And so that meant that I was working in the evenings a lot and on the weekends, as
mm,
opposed to the 9 to 5
mhm,
time frame. And so I think of entrepreneurship a lot like homeschooling, because people think education has to look very linear because that's what we've
yeah.
been taught. And a lot of diving into homeschooling is realizing that it's not necessarily the way that we were taught, or like understanding that building a business, and a lot of these books that are out there and like self-help people have built businesses that do not reflect our lived experiences. And so they
Mm,
might have had capital already. They might
mhm,
have had like the support system, the networks. Like if you are go to college and you are in sororities, you have that network.
mhm, yeah,
And when I was building my business, that didn't look like
mm,
that for me. And so I had to kind of figure it out, all while realizing that I wasn't the failure.
mhm,
So I think that the picture that is put out there from like white men that you might think of as like
mhm,
successful entrepreneurs is very much built on that colonial mindset,
mhm,
wealth mindset. And I want to be an encouragement that if you are doing all the things that you might hear and it's not working out for you, it's not you. It
mhm,
might just mean that you get to develop a new way of
mm,
doing things,
mhm,
create a new path.
mm,
And that's why I'm so excited when I have other Latina people like
mm,
in this entrepreneur space that
mm,
are doing things differently and they are finding success and redefining what success means.
Mhm.
And we're finding a whole collection of Latina businesses that have grown over the past 5 to 10 years
Right.
that can now pour into other people and say, like, no, we have a community that is going to support us and it might look different. And there's different voices, there's different authors that are putting books out there that actually reflect our lived experiences. And so that's exciting to me. So I know that's a lot of advice,
I love
but
it.
I say connect with the people that you resonate with. Connect with the people who are going to validate your lived experiences and support you and pull you up alongside with them. And look for people that look like you. Look
Mhm.
for people that are doing the things that you want to do in the way that you want to do them. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
look one way anymore.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much, Karina. That was so good for just sharing all. And I know you have a lot more to share and to give. And unfortunately, like 1 hour is not enough to talk with you. But I think I just want to thank you for taking the time to share your story and just share your journey with us, all the awesome golden nuggets that you dropped and gems that you dropped. So thank you so much. Where can we find you? And if people want to work with you, how can they get in touch with you?
Yes, thank you for having me on. I'm always so happy to share my story and connect with more people that might not live right next door to me. I
Right.
love Chicago, but I also love meeting people across the country. So you can find me at karinamora.com. That's where I share my photography, my facilitated trips, my speaking, and on elevatinglcultura.com, you can find all the podcast episodes and
Mm.
local events that we're doing and collabs that I'm doing with other small businesses in the area. And I'm on Instagram. So,
Yes, yes. And I will share all your information and links in the show notes. For folks who are listening, please come over to the show notes to click on Karina's website and her Instagram and all of the different ways you can get in touch with her. Thank you so much, Karina. And if I am ever in Chicago, I have to connect with you. And if you're ever in LA, you can always reach out and I'd love to. You are creating a multimedia space, so let's do an event or something.
yes, sounds good. Anytime.
Sounds good. All right, everyone. So that was Karina Mora of Elevating La Cultura. I know I learned so much from her, and I know that you did as well. I hope y'all took notes. And if not, you can always go back and listen again. And that's the beauty of podcasts. You can go back and listen and really take in what you just heard and what you listened to and what you learned. And here's what I learned from speaking with Karina. Number one is pivoting doesn't mean completely changing course, but more like layering ideas onto the ones that you already have. And I really enjoyed this part. And when she said this, because I think we've all had moments in our business and in our trajectories where perhaps things haven't worked out or have not been working out. Maybe some ideas or some course of action didn't go the way we expected, and maybe it hadn't been going the way we expected. And I've had moments where I've thought about, do I need to do something different? When do I need to completely change course? And what I like about this perspective and looking at pivoting from this angle that Karina offers is that it's not so much changing complete course and changing lanes. It's experimenting and layering on top of what you do have and seeing if that works. And then maybe later on you can let go of some of the earlier ideas that you were offering or earlier offerings. And that's a different way to look at pivoting. Number two is listening to your customers about what they want and being open to new ideas and suggestions. And I know that sometimes we have our own ideas about what we think we should be doing. And really, the answers do lie in the customers and our clients and our audience, because at the end of the day, as a business, we are serving people, we are bringing solutions. And while we do have a bottom line, we're doing it by service. And that happens by listening to what people are bringing to us and being open to the suggestions. So I really enjoyed that. And finally, finding creative ways to bring your identity, your experiences, your culture into your work. And this attracts the right customers, your right audience, so that you can define what entrepreneurship means to you. And I really love this because I think that I had an episode, and if you haven't heard it, I think it's one of the earlier episodes on ideal customer avatar with a twist, where I talk about me creating multiple avatars, because I just wasn't sticking to an avatar. I felt like I needed to serve everybody, and it was hard for me to really hone in on what my ideal client looked like. And I believe that when you start to find creative ways to really bring in who you are, your identity, your experiences, and your culture into your work, into your business, then it really attracts the right people to you. And those are the people, those are your ideal clients, because they're attracted to you because you're authentic, because you're really showing who you are. And so I believe that by really being authentic and learning and tapping into who you are as a person, even if it's a process, because as you learned in Karina's story, that we can go into business thinking that we need to show up a specific way, or thinking that we need to act a specific way in order to get these type of customers or be in this industry. And you might attract some customers that way, but you're not attracting the customers that are actually attracted to who you are. And then when you finally do tap into your identity, your culture, and bring that forward into your business, then you start to see the shift in the audience and the customers that you really want to work with. All right. So I hope that this was super helpful, super useful. Again, please come on over to beabosscoaching.com. And if you have any questions about anything that we talked about, you can send us an email. I'm at beatriz@beabosscoaching.com. Or I do have a few social media posts that I'll post on Instagram for this episode. So you can come on over to the post and comment any questions that you might have regarding today's interview. Don't forget to come back next week. Every Monday, I am here bright and early with new episodes. But I will say this, we're wrapping up, y'all, with this season. And I am starting to think about season 2. And I'm really excited about that. But I need a break from podcasting. I love it. And I need a break a little bit because it is a lot of work. But we're going to continue, and we're going to have a couple more interviews, maybe one more solo episode, and we're going to wrap. And then we're going to get ready for season 2. I'm starting to kind of work on that and think about that. And I'm excited to move on to season 2. I cannot believe it. Okay. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your week and stay safe. I know it's a COVID surge out there, y'all. So please remember to wear a mask, wash your hands, keep your distance, and get a booster. I think there's new boosters coming out soon, actually, in LA here. They're coming out this week. So go get a booster. All right. Bye.